I'm gonna start this video off with a factual statement. SpongeBob is an iconic franchise. Sure, it's declined so badly that people have to post out of context clips of newer seasons just to prove their point. But talking it through a pop culture standpoint, SpongeBob is iconic. And it's even a miracle that it has lasted longer than it should have. From going from a simple show about a yellow block of cheese to one of the most iconic shows not only on Nickelodeon, but in the world in general. If one were to say this to someone without the knowledge of SpongeBob, they'd think it's something of a fever dream only one could imagine if they're very high. But with a franchise like SpongeBob, obviously Nickelodeon's gotta do everything to milk it of its worth. And oh boy, is SpongeBob not dry of its different transitions to different mediums. But the one that I want to focus on today, if you couldn't tell by the title, is the movies. But more specifically, 2020's Sponge on the Run. Now I have a very personal connection in terms of nostalgia with the SpongeBob movies. More specifically, the SpongeBob movie from 2004. To briefly sum it up, it's a stone cold classic, nothing further, let's move on. Then came Sponge Out of Water in 2015, which was... It was okay, you know. It wasn't bad or anything, it just could have been a bit better, you know what I mean? And here we are at the topic of the video, Sponge on the Run, released in 2020. And this movie, in my personal opinion, is not good. And here I am making this video to tell you why I think that. So yeah, are you ready kids? Aye Captain, I can't hear you, blah blah blah. Let's just get on with the review, shall we? To start off this review, let's talk about the plot. As expected from SpongeBob, he's a fry cook at the Krusty Krab, he's a good employee to Mr. Krabs, he loves Gary, he does this, he does that, yada yada yada, you get it. However, SpongeBob's happy world is turned south when Gary suddenly goes missing. And after learning that Gary has been taken to the lost city of Atlantis and is currently used as a toy slave for King Poseidon, SpongeBob and Patrick embark on a journey to save Gary before it's too late. Anyways, let's get on to the ranting. And what better way to address the elephant in the room that this film is derivative. Not only is it pretty much a rehash of Have You Seen the Snail, it's also kind of a rehash of Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, with Have You Seen the Snail serving as the A plot and Whatever Happened to SpongeBob being served as the B plot. Now I could just end this critique off saying, oh it's derivative, and then just move on with my life, because the thing is, I don't hate the concept. And what I mean by this is while it's sad that they're going the derivative route of rehashing old episode ideas, there could be a glimmer of hope that they could still make something worthwhile with pre-existing material. The problem is that we're talking about Sponge on the Run, and the execution is horrible. For starters, the pacing is extremely off. It's hard for me to really describe how disjointed the pacing is, but the best way I could say it is that it never really hits that middle mark. Most of the scenes feel like they go on for way longer than they need to be, but there are also some times where scenes don't even have room to breathe. It either wants to jump to the next location or it wants to stay in that location and it just cannot decide which one it wants to do. And speaking of the pacing, the whole thing just feels like an extended episode of the show instead of an actual movie. What little stakes this movie has outside of saving Gary is almost slim to none, which leads me on to my next pointer as to why the storytelling is weak. And that is the plot elements. At best, they drag the movie on, and at worst, they're pointless. For the former, I'm gonna use the zombie saloon scene as an example. This sees our heroes taking on the challenge to free the souls of zombie pirates, while also defeating the bad guy known as El Diablo. And also accompanied in this scene is a music video type dance sequence with Snoop Dogg. And it serves no purpose to the story whatsoever. And it's not even that the scene is entirely pointless, it's just that it never comes back later in the film, so all in all it just makes it feel like it's just added just to extend the runtime. And going back to my previous statement, the only really thing that really adds to the story is the introduction of Sage, the magical tumbleweed that made SpongeBob and Patrick free those pirate zombies. He's pointless, but not in the way of the scene itself, but also just him in general. Not only doesn't he really help SpongeBob or Patrick in any significant way, it also feels like the film just wastes Keanu Reeves in general. It's almost like the film tried to do what the first SpongeBob movie did with its David Hasselhoff cameo. And while it's definitely weird when you look at it for the first time, it also kind of makes sense in the world of SpongeBob considering David Hasselhoff is known for Baywatch, which does take place on the beach. And added on to this, they did also pay off David Hasselhoff's character in some way, even if it was just for a quick cheap joke. But the problem with Sage in this movie is that he just does not have any of these qualities. It only feels like he was there just so that the filmmakers can talk about how they got Keanu Reeves into the movie, and that's pretty much it. And speaking of Sage, that goes on to the latter, which is where the plot elements are pointless. And I think the biggest smoking gun in all of this is the challenge coin, which is a coin that Sage gives to SpongeBob and Patrick as a way to boost their courage in saving Gary. And the reason I despise this coin in the movie is because of how it's paid off. To briefly sum it up, SpongeBob and Patrick eventually lose the coin while in the lost city of Atlantis. And after their pissy squabble, Sage comes in and just reveals that the coin doesn't really mean anything and that the courage is inside of them and something. And while I watched this movie, I just left thinking, well then what was the point of Sage's character? If the one thing that he did for the heroes is just completely worthless, why is he even in the movie? Just get rid of him. He serves no fucking purpose. I don't know how many times I have to repeat this, but it's so genuinely frustrating. The one thing that could have made Sage's character actually integral to the story is just the fucking cheap... I don't think I can even say more than this. I'm just gonna move on. So I've just finally calmed myself down after basically screaming to high heavens. Let's talk about the whatever happened to SpongeBob plot that I said would come back in the video. A sort of common criticism that some people have of the first movie is how it kinda underutilizes SpongeBob's friends. And while I understand the criticism and also don't understand it at the same time, I'm just glad that they don't do it how they do it in Sponge on the Run. SpongeBob's friends in the movie literally do nothing in the film. The most they do is kind of go to like the lost city of Atlantis, which leads to another scene that I'm gonna criticize later, but all you really need to know is that's the only time they're ever really useful. We don't even see them go to the same locations that SpongeBob and Patrick were formerly in or interact with it in any way. We just have a scene of them going out to rescue SpongeBob and Patrick, and that's just pretty much it. Nothing else. And this doesn't even go for Mr. Krabs, Sandy, and Squidward. It also goes for Plankton, who only really joins the crew to rescue SpongeBob just because the movie wants him to. Never mind the fact that he literally stole Gary from SpongeBob and sold him to King Poseidon. The movie just kinda goes through the motions with Plankton's character, almost like it's trying to be like Sponge out of water, but not at the same time. It's just weirdly written is what I'm trying to say. And I feel like that kinda really sums up why I do not like the movie's storytelling. Compared to the first two movies, this one really feels like it's trying so hard to get to that 90-minute runtime. There's all these different scenes, different kinds of characters, different kinds of pacing that honestly feels like this film was just made out of obligation instead of passion. Which is what I could be saying if it wasn't for one of the worst scenes in the entire movie in my opinion. And that is none other than the Camp Coral scenes. And oh boy, do I have a bone to pick with them. So in these scenes is around the start of the climax of the film, where SpongeBob and Patrick are about to get executed for trying to steal Gary from King Poseidon. But before SpongeBob and Patrick can be trialed, SpongeBob's friends swoop in to save the day by talking about their experiences with SpongeBob. And in the movie's terms, this is meant to be the most heartwarming and emotional scene in the film. But why do I think of it as the worst? Well, I can easily sum up my criticisms in three main ways, so let's go through all of them. The first point is obviously, it's fucking boring. No joke, this scene just goes on and on and on and on. And it's only 10 minutes. But why does it feel boring despite it being 10 minutes? Well, let's go into my second point. This point is a lot less obvious than the pacing issue. But once you notice it, you cannot unnotice it. And that is how predictable almost all of these stories are. No joke, every single one of them is basically summed up as SpongeBob was nice to me as a child, therefore he should be let go. The first issue to notice, in the movie's context, it doesn't really fucking matter. SpongeBob isn't being trialed for being rude all of a sudden, he's being trialed because he tried stealing a snail from King Poseidon. So why would these nice acts when he was a kid suddenly make him guilty? It doesn't make any sense. But that pointer is the least of my concerns, because all in all, this scene is just both emotionally manipulative and repetitive. It's emotionally manipulative in the way that the movie has to grind to a halt just so that the characters can spoon feed you emotional cues. But it falls flat once you realize that almost every single story just ends with SpongeBob being nice to them and then moves on to the next one and then the next one and then the scene just ends. The movie is just scared to make you visually emotional. You have to be emotional in the scenes. You have to cry. Tears have to be coming out. And it's weird for me to say this, but this same movie also has a better emotional scene than the one I'm talking about. In the scene where SpongeBob realizes Gary is missing and is holding up a picture of him and then reminiscing about his time in Camp Coral, I honestly kind of emotionally connected with it. Obviously the scene may be flawed or whatever, but I felt like it's better executed than the courtroom scene. But speaking of this scene, the last point I want to talk about why I hate this scene is, this is literally the first movie made fun of. Obviously, I know I sound crazy when I say that, but just hear me out, alright? Hear me out. The first SpongeBob's movie message is obvious. It's okay to be a kid. In concept, it sounds very cliched and tired, but in execution, it's a lot smarter than you may think. I really don't know how to describe it, but it has that fine balance between telling its message but also kind of like doing a lot more of it, if you know what I mean. And I think the best example in that regard would be the Goofy Goober rock scene. The whiplash between it being overly sappy and overly stupid is what sells the scene in my opinion. Not because it's a smart subversion of what I'm criticizing in Sponge on the Run, but also because the Goofy Goober rock actually kind of strengthens the message more. It's not just about embracing being a kid, it's also embracing weirdness in general. But in Sponge on the Run's case, it feels like it only took what the first movie did on the surface, but not in execution. And it's funny because in that same scene, they also do a song number called The Secret to the Formula Is You. But even if there was a submission in plain sight, I feel like the song number doesn't really elevate the subversion, kinda just blends in with the courtroom scene even more. And while I am now out of critiques on the courtroom scene, I now want to focus my critiques on the ending scene. As with the first SpongeBob movie's message being about embracing being a kid, Sponge on the Run's message seems to be embracing about friendship. With scenes like Patrick embracing SpongeBob to go out and save Gary, to also SpongeBob's friends coming to aid him at the end, and eventually in the scene I'm going to be talking about, where SpongeBob offers to be King Poseidon's friend after King Poseidon reveals his insecurities. Now, in the world of SpongeBob, I think it's kind of a reasonable message. I mean, SpongeBob is all about positivity and optimism, so it's not really out of the question to have a whole thing dedicated to friendship. However, you also need to take in good execution in order to make a message work. And in Sponge on the Run's case, I think that it doesn't really justify its message all that much. It's pretty much the same criticisms I had with the storytelling and the Camp Coral scenes. Not only how it rejects naturalism and embraces preachiness just to make it more emotional, but also how the movie tries to shoehorn in the message that looks don't matter and how you should embrace your natural self. And it would be a fine message for the villain, if it wasn't for the fact that we barely even see the villain to actually justify the message. All we really get is the introduction scene to him where he's freaking out over a pimple, and then the movie just exclusively focuses on SpongeBob and Patrick, leaving little to no breathing room for the message of looks don't matter to really be fully appreciated. And even in the moral friendship, does it really feel underutilized in the actual movie? Because as I mentioned previously, SpongeBob's friends don't really do anything plot-worthy to really make the message work. And even in the case of SpongeBob and Patrick, does the moral not feel justified enough? They never have a moment of teamwork or emotional vulnerability. Most of their memorable scenes come from them either bickering with one another or just doing stupid shit. Once again, this is an example of how the first movie did it a lot better. But to conclude this video, Sponge on the Run is a horrible movie in my opinion. In the best way I could describe it, it is literally creative bankruptcy, the movie. It's highly derivative of its previous incarnations, while also doing the bare minimum of any new ideas the film tries to have. It really is a film that when you compare it to its previous films, you could really tell that the writers' heads were just not in the game. Especially if you consider what they could have done had this movie be a different movie. Case in point, this movie was originally called It's a Wonderful Sponge and was about cat aliens, I think? I don't know if it could have been better or worse, but what I could say is it could have been a more interesting movie than what Sponge on the Run came out to be. It could have been like what I can compare the first SpongeBob movie to Sponge Out of Water. As I said in the beginning of the video, Sponge on the Water is kind of okay. I don't really hate the film per se, but I don't like it also. But one thing I can really appreciate it is how it tried to be interesting. It tried to stand out in a major way compared to the first movie. And while I don't think it executed it very well, I can appreciate the writers for trying to do something different compared to just rehashing plot ideas. So yeah, to conclude this video, Sponge on the Run is bad. I'm gonna go to my bed, I'm gonna watch Sandy Cheeks movie and kill myself.